Good morning, John. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. It's wonderful to have you on the program this morning. And we live in perilous times. I guess the news on the lockdown down in health front is still continuing to come in and change. And so we are certainly in a period of change and volatility. And so it's wonderful to have you here with us to talk about trends and what brands can do about it. And I want to get into that a little bit later in terms of, how are these trends determined, and because I think it's very important to know that, and what we think that what some advice is for people. But first of all, I want to start with you. So we haven't had a business designer on the program before. What is that, and how did you get into that?
It's a good question. Business design is a fairly relatively new discipline, but its piece parts are quite familiar. So as a business designer, I work to combine human insights, design methods, and business strategy together to solve problems for people and for businesses, right? So if we can understand what makes people tick, we can help to design products and services that are really relevant and meaningful to them and that help to achieve a business objective. So that's the role of a business designer. We practice what we call design-led strategy.
Right. And how did you get into that as a career? Is it something you wanted to do ahead of time, or is it something that you kind of life found a way to put you into that role?
Well, I'm a little older, so I didn't know you could do it because we weren't talking about it at the time that I was going through school. But I was always interested in what makes people tick. So I studied psychology and sociology, right. And then I applied that in media and marketing and so forth. And so it just kind of came together periodically over time. But I will say that business design is increasingly established now. So for people who are interested, you can take a course of business design. You can major in business design at Rotman, for instance, through the MBA program. Yeah,
that's amazing. And I know that we have some people from our CMA Next program like watching this morning, and so I think that's an important aspect of some of their decision making going into their careers. And I also like the fact that you mentioned that your backgrounds in psychology, sociology, those are the underlying sciences behind the profession of marketing. So I think that's really cool. So we're talking about trends today. Fjord Trends, to be specifically, is who your employer is, and you have 7. I don't think we'll get to all 7 today, but we'll try to get maybe at 4 of the 7. How does Fjord determine what is a trend? Is there like a science to it, or is it just kind of coming up with it over meetings, or how does that happen?
It's a really actually fun and disciplined process to establish the trends. Fjord, which is the design and innovation group inside of Accenture Interactive, has people all over the world. And so to establish the trends, every year we engage in what we call Trends Week. We form small teams who articulate their observations and insights around what's happening in the world around them. We pitch them to a panel of thought leaders. We can join in those pitches so that we can hear what else people are seeing around the world. And we all enjoy this experience of saying, hey, I'm in North America, I'm seeing this, and someone in Asia is seeing something kind of the same thing, and so forth. So, because that is the nature of a trend, right? It's a change in attitudes, values, or behaviors that are happening now, right? Not way out there. So those get synthesized and distilled down into that small set once we start to kind of connect the dots and affinitize what we're hearing. And that's when we then publish out the list. We never know if it's going to be 4, 5, 6, 10. This year we have 7.
Oh, cool. That's great. Is there an overarching theme for the times that we're in these days?
There is, yeah. So we refer to it as the meta theme. It's kind of the backbone of all of the trends. And this year it's called Mapping New Territories. So the reason we have concluded that this meta theme is mapping new territories is because it's really about the fact that we're recognizing that the last year for all of us in the pandemic has been a year of incredible, really almost unprecedented disruption and change.
Right.
And it's pushed us so hard, right? Like we're moving very quickly to experiment with new ways of doing things, new ways of bringing products and services to market, new ways of supporting people to relate to and engage with each other. So in effect, we are all engaged in this activity of mapping new territories. And we also see it as a very hopeful kind of meta theme, because it's a chance for us, particularly now, as I think we're starting to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, to rewrite the script. What is the map on that we want? What is the new world that we want to create for ourselves? Yeah.
Well, that's great. And obviously there's been a lot of good social discussions and moving ahead in terms of how the world can work a little bit better than it was in the past. It's almost like we're taking advantage of some of the disruption that comes with a health crisis. And I guess those brands who are more adaptable, have more agility, are going to be the winners coming out of this. So the first thing we want to talk about is something you refer to as, or Fjord refers to as, collective displacement. I think that it speaks for itself. But how do you define collective displacement?
Collective displacement is kind of the most essential of all the trends, and it's really about this tremendous shift in our lives, in both where we spend our time and when we spend our time. So it will come as no surprise to everybody. We're moving. There's been tremendous kind of exodus out of densely packed cities. We saw this in Manila and New York and Toronto, right? People are moving out. So where we live has experienced displacement. Our sense of community has experienced displacement. The types of things that we used to do together as a community, to go to a live sporting event or listen to music or something like that, have changed, right? So it's kind of challenged us to think about how we understand and know that we're part of a community. So all of our day-to-day activities, shopping, schooling, working, have all been displaced. And then really fundamentally, our sense of agency, our choices over our own lives, has really been displaced. Yeah. So
talk about the impact on business of this collective displacement. I mean, some of it's obvious, but there's maybe some aspects of this we haven't considered.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, some of the more obvious implications, of course, have been, we've seen bankruptcies. We've seen large retailers have to shutter some stores. We saw that with Bed Bath & Beyond, the Children's Place. We've seen small retailers, but particularly independent, quickly migrate to online if they weren't there already, right? And we've seen large CPG brands constrain what they're putting on the shelves, right? It's been pragmatic for them to think about doing larger volumes and batches of very popular products, not as practical in this moment to invest in a lot of innovation and new flavors and things like that. So those are some of the obvious ones. I think the more subtle implication, though, is what we think of as the visibility challenge.
Right.
And that comes down to this idea that as a consumer, if I'm not walking around in the world, popping into your shop, seeing people engaging with your product, wearing your product, how do you as a brand stay visible to me? And on the flip side, if all of my interactions, my work life, my home life, my shopping life, they're all blended now, and my interactions with you as a brand might take place in these little micro moments, how do I stay sufficiently visible to you? How do you know where I am and what's meaningful to me? Because the tracking is getting harder and harder, right?
Yeah, it reminds me of that old adage that says, if the question, or if a tree falls in the woods and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? And I think it's kind of the whole thing is it really is about visibility. You got to be where the consumers are. So what's the trick in your research to staying visible? And can you give me a couple of examples of that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the brands that are succeeding in overcoming this visibility challenge are the ones that are encouraging us to engage in more exploration. They're inspiring us in new ways so that we want to interact with them. And in a lot of cases, that's about creating net new experiences that we haven't had before, that are more immersive, that account for the fact that maybe we can't go in the store, or even into, it may have nothing to do with retail. There are so many experiences that we can't have in the world right now. So to give you a couple of examples, if we think about Nike, they're using augmented reality now to help people get that right sneaker fit without having to go into the store. And as an alternative to that, or just another example, I should say, we've got something like Amazon Explore, which I was playing around with recently. It's quite remarkable. If you haven't seen it, you can live stream a video with a tour guide. Maybe you want to experience the bird market in Paris. You'll go with them for an hour, and you'll have a kind of a one-on-one live stream,
Right.
or Q&A. They could take you into shop. There can be shoppable moments in that.
Yeah.
So, it's finding new ways to really bring us something that is deeply engaging and also joyful, because, we really need that kind of in this past year. It's been tough, right? So if you want to get my attention, bring me some joy.
Yeah, no, that's great. Good. So that's collective displacement. The next theme that we're highlighting today is do-it-yourself innovation, or DIY innovation.
Mm-hmm.
What's the psychology or sociology behind this? Like, how did this trend get started, or why?
DIY innovation is really about the idea that innovation isn't just driven by technology. It's really a product of people's individual ingenuity and creativity. We're in this classic moment where, necessity is the mother of invention. We know that. So we've seen an explosion in entrepreneurship. We've seen people, in particular, as it relates to this idea, taking existing products and services and hacking them to create new opportunities for themselves, right?
Right.
So
that's amazing.
we saw Fortnite become a concert hall. We've seen Zoom overnight become, people's lifeline to school, things like that.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And it is amazing. One of the things that's amazed me is the degree to which we are collectively as a society able to pivot and move on with our lives and make the best of things. And then part of that is our creativity, which is great.
Yeah.
But I think this might be particularly challenging for brands, particularly in their innovation cycle, right? So what changes from that perspective?
It is challenging. I think it's a bit of a mindset shift for brands. I come from the world of design, and we always talk about co-creating with customers, and usually think of that as something that we do upstream, like let's get them in thinking about what the new products and services can and should be. So we co-create at that point. With DIY innovation, what we're talking about is we also want to invite that kind of co-creation downstream. So the mindset shift here is, hey, you're going to release a product that is unfinished, that you're actually going to invite people to take in new directions. So it's an enabler to people's creativity.
Right.
So you have to be kind of comfortable with the idea that you're setting something free. And instead of moving on to the next product and saying, well, what should we do next? The question that you're challenging yourselves and your consumers to answer is, well, what else can I do with this? Yeah,
no, that's great. What's your take on brands? Are they ready for this?
I think it's uneven. Some are more ready than others. And I think we've seen some good responses in, media platforms. Things like TikTok have figured out how to make this work for them. Other brands, it's going to be a steeper challenge.
Yeah.
Particularly like a luxury brand, right? We don't like to think about that as in any way unfinished.
Yeah, and I think they have to really make that full move to understand that they're sharing, that it's kind of co-creation of their end product with the end consumer. And that is, that I can see that's an interesting trend. The next one I think maybe might help them with it a little bit. And it sounds like kind of oxymoronic to me, liquid infrastructure. Maybe it's not. Is this all about supply chains, or is it more than that?
Supply chain, it is a big piece of the puzzle here with liquid infrastructure. And the idea here is liquid infrastructure is effectively like the flip side of collective displacement. If we're, as people, displaced and shifting our lives and where we do things, we need to think differently about how the supply chain services those end consumers, and where there might be moments all throughout that supply chain to create value for people, to realize trapped value using assets in new ways, and create little moments of delight as well all throughout that journey.
Great. My assumption is that consumers' expectations haven't been lowered during the pandemic. They're actually in some ways been heightened. Can you give me an example of consumers' high expectations today?
Sure. And actually, you're talking, we would refer to that as liquid expectations, right? The idea
Okay,
that we like liquid. And so the idea is that, the best in class experience is the one that sets the new bar, right? And it
right,
doesn't have to be in the exact same category. And so there's some fluidity there. And we apply that same notion then to the supply chain. So in terms of changing expectations, I think, some of the experiences that we've been accustomed to enjoying when we could interact more fulsomely with the world, we're trying to recapture. So we've seen brands do things. D2C is one example, a lot more direct to consumer plays where people are experimenting with that kind of immediacy, that, immediate
right.
gratification, but also customization, like there's the Kit Kat stores. There's one I know in Toronto that I haven't yet visited, and I don't know what they're doing right now in the pandemic, but you could go in and design and customize your own premium chocolates and then customize the packaging. Now you can do that online as well and have it sent to you. So we're, the expectations keep ratcheting up.
Right. And I guess part of it is reevaluating the assets you already have in place and seeing if you can use them in different ways, right?
It is. It is. So if you look at things, examples like an IKEA, they're thinking about how they can create now a secondhand market, right? They have
Right.
and be a part of the circular economy in a way that actually it creates growth for them. Likewise, Amazon and Whole Foods, they're looking at how they can use some of their Whole Foods outlets as dark stores and fulfillment centers, pre-existing asset that actually allows them to get into more of the e-com space a little more easily. And I think food is actually a place where we see the effect of liquid expectations, since we're on this, really quite pronounced. When you think about this huge shift in the way we shop to e-com, I don't know about you, but I used to get a package, now and again, and then, delivered to my door. Then there was this huge flurry, November, December in particular. I think it felt like something was arriving every day.
Yeah.
So, the more often we experience that, the more points of comparison we have around the quality of that experience. And so I can start expecting more even in the delivery experience. So now that notion of the last mile has kind of shrunk down like this. And in some cases, it's the last 10 feet, right? So
Yeah.
the unboxing becomes important. And we start to see that within food in particular. Had an interesting conversation with someone the other day who said, yeah, I mean, I like to get food delivered to my house, or I might pick it up, but it has to unbox nicely to be something I want to put on my table for my family dinner. So now there's a new point in that whole journey that is getting added attention and emphasis.
Yeah, no, I was at one of the high-end restaurants. We did some takeout from a few weeks ago, and just the steaks were, those hand warmers that you put in your mittens at football games or whatever when it's chilly. The steaks were on top of those, and it was like, oh man, this is hotter than I would expect, and that was great. So that's some of those innovations to try to bring it closer to the peak experience within a restaurant, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think they were going to end off in the last one talking a little bit about rituals, and rituals. We're humans, right? So we've rested on these rituals. Never even thought probably that we had them. We found comfort in them, and now they've been taken away. And so as good human beings, we replace our rituals with new rituals that are within the possibility set of the health restrictions.
Yes.
My COVID hack is Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and it's a new ritual where we buy a pint of ice cream on a Wednesday night and go through it over 4 nights and try not to get really, really overweight. But it's part of our lived experience now, and so that's happening. What role can brands play on top of that macro trend?
Sure. I think there's a really huge opportunity here for brands, actually, for the very reason you're citing. I mean, all of our rituals have been disrupted, and that's painful because they are so human. They ground us, and they ground us in a few ways that we think brands can play a meaningful part. We have a few notions of what a ritual can be. One is the idea of ritual as portal, and this is where you're kind of doing something, some ritual that helps you kind of change channels, right? So for me, that used to be the commute home, as an example, from the office to home. I would spend on the subway, I'd listen to my podcast, kind of decompress, change channels. Now my commute from my office to my kitchen is about 10 feet. So I need something else, right? And I actually read recently that cooking dinner is kind of becoming the new commute. People are looking for something to change channels in that way. So brands can really help there. We see that with health and beauty brands in particular. There's a huge opportunity. We have a notion of ritual as a sense of belonging. These are social rituals. Maybe you have drinks on a regular basis, or you're part of that sporting community that wants to cheer an event. So brands can help there as well.
Right.
Great example from Mars, where they've offered up variety bags of candy to kind of help people who want to have Zoom costume parties. It's not limited just to Halloween anymore, that kind of thing, helping you to create a new ritual. And then another example is ritual as anchor, right? And these are the biggies. These are the ones that help us really understand as humans, the marking and passing of time, right. Weddings, funerals, things like that. And we've seen some really innovative offerings there as well. People figuring out that a wedding or a funeral doesn't only have to be a Zoom experience, although we're grateful for Zoom, but we can be a little bit more thoughtful about all of the trappings and meaningful things that go into, staging a wedding. Like, how can we treat our guests and so forth, all of these things. So there's some great platforms that are helping us to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I know at the CMA, we've taken a lot of effort into, as we went virtual with our events and our galas, that we offer an opportunity for networking, offer an opportunity for people to connect in a way. Otherwise, it feels very flat. And so I think that's very, very important for brands to understand. Again, human psychology, human sociology, as it relates to people's need for these touchstones in their life. And I think that's tremendous. Well, man, that was a great conversation, Amy. I'm just checking to see if there's any questions that have come in. I don't see any yet. If they do come in, we'll certainly answer them offline. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. Appreciate having you on the program.